we're back on the backstory and on the radio in Washington, D.C. on 105.5 FM, AM 1390. Joined now from RT, author and correspondent for RT, the great Caleb Maupin. Caleb, how you doing?
I'm great. How about yourself?
Good.
Well,
it's very good to be back on again. So we want to talk to you about China eventually, but let's talk about Twitter files. You've been doing some reports on RT about that. So what do we know about Russiagate and the boss, Caleb?
Well, I mean, there's been a number of drops from Elon Musk, a lot of revelations about what's been going on Twitter. But one of the particular drops, if I remember correctly, that Elon Musk leaked to Matt Taibbi, basically shows that the FBI went to Twitter and said, we would like you to, come up with evidence of Russia using Twitter to manipulate the American political process. And Twitter conducted its own investigation, and it dug into it, and it didn't really find much. And it just said, there's obviously RT, they have their account, and they, that's Russian media, but we're not really finding much. And so the FBI came back to Twitter with articles from the mainstream media. I mean, this is classic, with Wall Street Journal articles, with articles from NPR and the mainstream press, and said to Twitter, well, the mainstream media says it, so you better find this. And so Twitter scrambled to come up with results that didn't match their original findings, which fit the narrative that mainstream media outlets were promoting. And if you want to talk about shady behavior, that is a great example here. I mean, you were hearing all about how, Americans couldn't have possibly voted for Trump. It was because the evil Russian bots and trolls on Facebook and Twitter all got inside their heads and manipulated them. We now find out that Twitter's own investigation showed that wasn't the case. But the FBI was determined to find evidence to match the narrative that was already floating around the mainstream press. That's got to be embarrassing to have that come out, and it shows that there is a lot of meddling in the U.S. political process, but it doesn't come from Russia. It comes from our intelligence agencies. It comes from the FBI. It comes from the CIA. It comes from very powerful entities that want to craft and control discourse. And it fits how they suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story and said that was off limits. It fits a number of things that have been revealed. There is plenty of election meddling going on. There is plenty of an effort to manipulate the minds of Americans and control the discourse, but it is not coming from Russia.
And I've said there's no way, leave election issues aside completely. There's no way Biden's a legitimate president simply because the FBI and the CIA were involved in burying the Hunter Biden laptop story. Do you agree that he can't claim legitimacy given what happened in this election? What do you think, Caleb?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the details here, imagine any other election. You find out that the son of one of the major candidates, who is the incumbent, who's running for re-election, or is formerly the vice president. Not running for re-election, but the son of one of the major candidates was using his position as vice president to basically make all kinds of shady deals in Ukraine, make all kinds of shady deals around the world, all kinds of other scandalous information. I mean, if you think about the kind of things that have become big scandals that have had big influences on American elections before. I believe, in 1972, Vice Presidential candidate Terry Eagleton, it was revealed he had been depressed at one point. He'd gotten, some psychiatric help for being depressed, and they ended up dropping him from the ticket, and that probably cost the Democrats the 1972 election. Nixon got reelected because of that. You look at so many of these incidents, they turn into really big deals. John Kerry mentioning that Dick Cheney's daughter is a lesbian. Oh, my gosh. Well, here we have the son of one of the major candidates is involved in all kinds of scandalous activities. And then we have the FBI and the U.S. government power structure just saying, well, this may be true, but because we somehow decided this story is connected to Russia somehow, which they still haven't explained how that is, somehow this fact is connected to Russia. So we are not going to allow it to become part of the discourse. The New York Post article about it will not be shared on Twitter. Mainstream media outlets are going to be explicitly told not to cover it. Facebook is going to be in consultation with the FBI, deciding to suppress it. And you think that doesn't have an impact on the election results? I mean, that is the most blatant act of election meddling that you can think of. I mean, we're told that, that Julian Assange revealing Hillary Clinton's, emails and leaking some emails, that threw the election for Trump. Well, I mean, data tends to show otherwise. But this was a major scandal regarding Joe Biden and how his family very much benefited from his position as vice president under Obama, and how his son was involved in all kinds of shady financial activities. And if this had gotten the front page treatment it deserved, which it would have gotten in any other election, mind you, there's a very good chance Trump would have won. And I think everybody knows that. But the power structure in the United States determined that wouldn't happen. Now, and when you bring this up, I'm not talking about vote counting. I'm not talking about mail-in ballots, none of that. I'm just talking about the fact that a major campaign issue was taken off the table by entities in the American government, in the Department of Justice, in the intelligence apparatus, that are supposed to not be involved in political back and forth. We in the United States, we maintain that the military, our intelligence agencies, our police are above the law. The police, the military, the CIA, the FBI, they're not supposed to be trying to influence the political process. They're just supposed to be enforcing the law. So where do they get the idea that it's their job to intervene and help one candidate at the expense of another? And this is particularly outrageous. And so I think if you look at the details, I think that should cast a shadow over Biden's entire presidency. The fact that this happened and the fact that this isn't even being treated as a wider scandal.
And so just to be clear, you're not a Trump fan also. You're not saying this because you're biased for Trump, right, Caleb? No,
I'm a leftist. My wife is an immigrant. I've been involved. I've been arrested in leftist demonstrations before. I'm an advocate of socialism. But I'm telling you that we have a situation here where some of the most powerful forces within the U.S. government apparatus decided what the election results should be. Our elections in the United States are rigged enough as they are because we only have two choices, Coke or Pepsi, McDonald's or Burger King, or in this case, Democrats or Republicans. The discourse is very, very limited. We have this electoral college system where if you're a Republican in New York or if you're a Democrat in Texas, your vote is pretty much irrelevant. So in a lot of ways, our political election system is not as democratic and representative as it could be. But then when even the two choices were given, we have the FBI stepping in to decide, what we should be allowed to hear and basically maneuvering to help one candidate. At this point, you can't call it democracy. I mean, at this point, it seems like the leadership is being chosen by the rich and powerful and not by a popular vote and not by a popular mandate. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're exactly spot on. And by the way, that's why we love you as a guest, because what you practice is something that seems dead now, which is, I may disagree with you, but I'll defend your right to say it. And you can separate your opinions from the facts. And I appreciate that about you, Caleb.
And principles. So, Jason, you can separate opinions from principles. That's what's important, because you see, that is very important to me, because what we're essentially standing for is that we want the right to be able to exercise the First Amendment. So you can't very well be sincere in that desire and simultaneously want to silence someone simply for disagreeing with them.
Well, sure, and that's what's happening now. I mean, they silenced a news story that was not helping one particular candidate. They pressed Twitter to find bots and trolls that were not there in order to feed their agenda. And now we continue to see purges of social media. Elon Musk is in, and things are supposed to get better, but we continue to see suppression on Twitter. We continue to see suppression on Facebook. Even though TikTok is full of stuff that's very critical of China, they still hate TikTok, and they can't stand that TikTok is not just completely under their thumb and is owned by China. I mean, we are seeing a huge effort to basically control the minds of Americans. And it's very frightening. And I will add that, I think that this fits in. It's not just, rival news media outlets from around the world they're trying to suppress. in a lot of ways, they're trying to suppress any middleman in U.S. society. Any place that you might get, guidance or authority from in U.S. society, any place that might offer you a way to go other than Facebook, Twitter, social media, and mainstream news is trying to be suppressed. I mean, they don't want, community associations to exist. They don't want religions to exist. They really want us all to be atomized individuals who turn to them for direction and turn to the algorithms to be told what to think. And they're trying to break apart relationships, break apart families. We are living in a very frightening period where social atomization is leading to catastrophe. And I think this is a symptom of a wider problem, that they basically want your brain logged on so they can program it as they choose, and they don't want anyone to get in the way of that process.
And Caleb, I'm on the right, libertarian conservative right, and a lot of times callers call in. I see this among people on the right. They blame China. The term CCP comes up all the time on the right. Even I'm a Tucker Carlson fan in general, but when he talks about China, I just roll my eyes. Now, you're a fan of China. Is that right, Caleb?
Absolutely. I think China is playing a very good role in the world right now. They are a force for good, and I have a positive assessment. Not that they don't have problems like any country, but I think they're playing a very good role internationally.
So what do you think people who don't, one of the reasons I like your work, by the way, and have liked it for years, is on RT, you remember you did a great report about World War II and people not knowing, Americans not knowing Russia's role in World War II. That basically Russia won World War II. And you remember that piece you did. It was great.
Sure.
And I think people do not know history. So what do you think factually? Like I heard today someone saying China's got a lot of starving people. Is the case that 120 million people, I think that's the number they use, are malnourished in China? Because what I know is the mainstream media gets everything wrong about Russia. I know that because I research. And so I can't imagine they get everything wrong about Russia, but on China, they nailed it.
Right.
So
what's the truth, Caleb?
Well, actually, China has just celebrated the eradication of extreme poverty in the country. That's one of the big milestones they've achieved. Millions and millions of people have been lifted out of poverty by the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, they are electrifying regions that have never had electricity before. Look, if Trump supporters, if they like what Trump said, make America great again, they ought to love the Chinese Communist Party because they made China great again. I mean, China used to be one of the poorest countries in the world. It was the sick man of Asia. Malnutrition, starvation, illiteracy happened all the time, was routine. Well, the Chinese Communist Party got in there, and it certainly wasn't easy, and there was certainly hardship along the way, but they are now the second largest economy in the world. Every day, another person in China becomes a millionaire, and China has many, many billionaires. A growing percentage of the world's billionaires come in China. China's making great technological breakthroughs in technology. They've really empowered. It's very interesting. It is a Marxist government, right? I mean, it's, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics, and, they have a lot of state-run industries and state-run banks, but with their overall kind of planned and centralized economy, they have done a lot to cultivate a very strong middle class of, people making breakthroughs in computers, of people inventing new products, and they have really funded, people, getting into, science and technology and engineering. I mean, they have really, really pushed forward a lot of things that I think conservatives really believe in, right? Go out, work hard for the good of the country, work hard for advancing yourself and your community, build the country up. I think there's a lot that American conservatives could love about China. If they could, kind of look past the fear-mongering. It's very easy for our leaders to blame our problems on China, to just say, well, it's China's fault, it's China's fault. Well, no. What's going on is we don't have leaders who fight for us the way the Chinese Communist Party fights for China. They fight for their people. They have worked really, really hard to pull that country up. We should have leaders here that fight for us the way the Chinese Communist Party fights for its people. It's that's the issue there. It's not that the Chinese are corrupting our political process or trying to get us. It's that our leadership is weak and rolls over for Wall Street.
I think it's rolling over for China as well. Joe Biden's son received quite a lot of money from Chinese companies.
Well, I would want to look into the details of that, but you have to remember Chinese companies and the Chinese government are not synonymous, right? I mean, American companies can do shady things around the world, and that doesn't necessarily make the White House responsible for it.
Maybe the CIA.
Well, and the more you look into these things, the more you realize that China very much is trying to bring stability. And the role that they have played in Central Asia in particular is building infrastructure. It is in China's interest to see stability spread throughout the Eurasian world island. And the role they've played in Africa is a particularly good one as well. Building up countries. And the United States is largely coming in and trying to prevent these countries from building coal power plants, saying, oh, climate change, these people got to go without electricity. That's no good. They can't have electricity. And China's trying to build coal power plants. It's trying to build hydroelectrical power plants. It's trying to wipe out poverty and illiteracy, and it's trying to build up countries so that their economies will get stronger, so China will have more of an economy to trade with. They look at things in terms of win-win cooperation, whereas
but wait a minute.
We're getting... Oh, go on. Go ahead.
Isn't it also true that they're going to these countries in Africa and, exploiting the natural resources like lithium and using children to mine lithium? Sure, they're electrifying them and all this stuff, but isn't it just to exploit the resources and the people there for high-tech industries?
Well, I think many of these countries really want to have their resources utilized. That was
by kids digging around in lithium mines?
And they want to develop their economy and export their natural resources, whereas Wall Street wants those minerals in the ground so that they can have a monopoly. Right? If you look at Bolivia, for example, Evo Morales, the president there, was trying to work with Chinese companies to utilize their natural resources, and he got removed. Elon Musk said on Twitter, we can coup anyone we want. The idea was they wanted to keep that lithium in the ground, just like, Saddam Hussein was using the oil of Iraq. He was selling it on the international markets. Well, now he's been overthrown. Iraqi oil exports are down to 10% of what they were at the time that the USA invaded, and now people are buying their oil from ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron, or their partners in Saudi Arabia. That generally the effort of American corporations is to prevent these countries from developing and exploiting their own natural resources.
But was it that they wanted to keep Saddam Hussein's oil in the ground, or that they were upset that he was exploiting the oil for food program to sell oil for euros and defy the petrodollar? I don't disagree with you that the United States abuses the hegemonic nature of its control of oil and military power to prop up the dollar, but I think that we might disagree on why.
Well, I think if you look at Libya, it's a similar story. Libya was once a very prosperous country that was selling oil on the international markets, had the highest life expectancy in the African continent.
Gold.
Now it's been bombed.
For gold.
And now
but Libya's issue was he wanted to create the African dinar and trade oil for gold, and that would threaten the hegemony of the U.S. dollar and this petrodollar system, which Joe Biden has destroyed by sanctioning Russia, creating a market of nations outside, the BRICS nations and India and China and people who want to buy Russian energy. I think we agree in general, but disagree on the purpose. I think it's the United States protecting the Ponzi scheme and criminal nature of the petrodollar system created by Kissinger, who interestingly just flip-flopped on his position on Ukraine.
And that takes me to my next question for you, Caleb. So I think that one of the differences, Jason, is China and Russia don't see themselves as hegemons. The U.S. sees itself as a hegemon and wants to keep that. But what does China think of the U.S.? Do we know from the statements they make, are they trying to take us over, Caleb?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. When President Xi Jinping, when he moved up into the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, one of the main things that they promoted was the fact that he had studied in Iowa, that he had been to Iowa and he'd lived in Iowa and studied farming techniques from American farmers. So much so that the house that he stayed in, this farmhouse he slept in Iowa, they have rebuilt a model of it that is like a tourist attraction in China. People pay money to go and walk through a reconstruction of this farmhouse in Iowa that President Xi Jinping slept in. Back in the 80s, when he was just a low-level politician, he went to Iowa to study farming, and that was one of the main pivoting moments of his life. Xi Jinping owes a lot to America. He's very open about that. And he says often that the American dream is an inspiration on the concept of the Chinese dream, which is a central part of his political philosophy. So I think there is a very American streak in China, and I think that they have learned a lot from America, but there are also some differences.
Yeah, actually, hold on one second, Caleb. Jason, I did not know that about Xi Jinping and Iowa.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
Neither one of us, and we kind of know the news, Caleb, but you great point, and I think very few conservatives know that at all. Okay, Caleb.
Yeah, he lived in Muscatine, Iowa, is where he studied American farming techniques, and that was one of his, selling points. That's a big part of his autobiography and his story. So I think when it really gets down to it, in the United States, we have an economy that's not about building things anymore. It's about speculation. It's about derivative rip-off schemes and other financial bubbles. Whereas the economy that's arising around the world, in Russia, they sell oil and natural gas. In China, they're making some of the best cell phones in the world and computer chips. And if you look around the world, there is another economy that is about actual physical growth. We have an economy that's about speculation and maintaining a monopoly for Western conglomerates, holding back economic development.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's a lot of really...
You made a speech a few years ago, a couple years ago, I think it was. But you were talking about how imperialism, and I'll call the new neo-imperialism, the City of London-based imperialism, always has the effect of killing capitalism. Did you remember the point you were making? You're making it better than I. But do you remember the point you made?
Well, I think, when Lenin wrote his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, he was describing how the industrial stage, think of those industrial giants, Carnegie and the steel corporations, and the age of industrial capitalism, that gilded age was being brought to an end. And bankers and finance capital were becoming dominant, and the government was increasingly playing a very important role in facilitating it. And a lot of libertarians have picked up on this too. I mean, they don't see what we live under now as genuine capitalism. They see it as kind of a merger between the state and multinational corporations. And I think they're picking up on a real change. There was certainly, when you talk about the 1880s, 1890s, up into the turn of the century, there was a distinct change in the nature of the global economy. And I think that's absolutely the case. And that really the way Western capitalist corporations maintain their power at this point is through what I think you could call accumulation through destruction, holding back economic development in order to maintain a monopoly, and taking parts of the world as captive markets, preventing countries from developing their own industries. There's this whole, Hollywood understanding of imperialism. They think it's the movie Avatar, right? They think there are these beautiful people that don't have technology and they live in the woods, and then the evil white man shows up with his electricity and takes away their beautiful natural whatever. That's Hollywood. And I don't know what that is, but that is not the economic understanding of imperialism that Marxists have historically pointed to. Marxists have pointed to imperialism as something that holds back raising countries out of poverty, holds back the development of natural resources, keeps countries in a primitive state of development. And I think if you look at the role of...
Ken,
go on. Yeah.
Let me interrupt you only because we're almost out of time. You're so great. And by the way, you summed up very fairly and accurately the libertarian position about capitalism. You summed it up very well. Caleb, are you doing any political activism you want to talk about in the last few seconds we have here?
Well, there will be an announcement pretty soon. This spring, there's going to be some exciting events in Washington, D.C. I am a big supporter of this February 19th demonstration that's been called as a joint call between the Libertarian Party and the People's Party, Rage Against the War Machine. I intend to be there. But there are also some other events that will be announced soon in Washington, D.C. Coming up this spring. So stay tuned.
Sounds great. Caleb, always love having you on the show. Jason, great job co-hosting, and thanks so much to Charles Lotell for being with us in the first hour. We'll be back tomorrow on the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm Lee Stranahan, and this has been The Backstory.